Silk always feels cooler against my skin in the mornings. I was leaning against the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse office, coffee in one hand, scrolling through property updates on my phone. The street below buzzed with the rhythm of a city I now quietly owned, literally. I'd never told anyone, not even the people who once swore they'd never need me. A faint vibration shook the glass desk. My phone lit up. Mom calling. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the decline button. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 3 years. Not since that night. My heart pulsed a little faster, the way it always did when the past came knocking. I answered, my voice steady. Hello. Her tone was different. Breathless, rushed. We need to talk. It's urgent. Can we come over? I glanced around at my office, the polished mahogany table, the custom art on the walls, the quiet hum of the espresso machine. They had no idea where over even was. Memories tried to push through, but I anchored myself in the present. I wasn't the scared 21-year-old they'd kicked out in the middle of the night. I was someone else now, someone they couldn't quite picture. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Sure, I said softly. I'll text you the address. They were about to see everything. I can still smell the rain from that night. It had been one of those storms that rattled the windows and made the old ceiling leak in the hallway. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a chipped mug of tea cradled in my hands, when my father's voice cut through the house like a blade. We've had enough, Sarah. You can't keep living here without a real plan. My chest tightened. I'm finishing my degree. I just need a little more time. You've been saying that for months. My mother snapped, her arms crossed, eyes cold. You're wasting your life and ours. The words stung, but it was the look on her face, not anger, but disappointment, that gutted me. I had been working part-time at a bookstore, barely covering my tuition, saving every extra coin in a worn leather wallet my grandmother had given me. For your independence, she'd whispered when she slipped it into my hand at my high school graduation. That night, I realized independence wasn't just a dream. It was going to be a necessity. You want me gone? I asked, voice trembling. My father didn't even look at me when he said, yes. I remember the way my hands shook as I packed. A duffel bag, my laptop, a handful of clothes. I slipped the leather wallet into my backpack, feeling the weight of the few $100s inside, my entire safety net. When I stepped outside, the cold rain hit my skin like tiny knives. I turned back once. The living room light glowed behind the lace curtains, silhouettes moving inside. They didn't come to the door. A lump swelled in my throat, but something else burned underneath it. Resolve. At the bus stop, I pulled out my phone and sent one message to the only person I trusted then, my old literature professor, Mrs. Hayes. Do you know of any part-time work? Anything at all? Her reply came quickly. I have something better. Meet me tomorrow at 9 a.m. I didn't know it then, but that message would change the trajectory of my life. The rain kept falling, soaking through my thin jacket. I wrapped my arms around myself and whispered the words my grandmother once told me. When they close the door, don't knock. By the whole street. The next morning, I arrived at Mrs. Hayes' tiny office, dripping wet from the drizzle that hadn't stopped since the night before. She looked up from her desk, her silver hair pinned neatly, glasses sliding down her nose. You look like you've been through a storm, she said softly. I have, I replied, my voice cracking more than I wanted. She handed me a towel and a steaming mug of coffee. Then let's make sure you never have to weather one unprepared again. That day, she introduced me to a local property developer she knew through her brother. They needed someone to handle basic admin work, answering calls, organizing files, booking meetings. It was nothing glamorous, but it was steady. And it came with one unexpected perk: access to the kinds of conversations most people my age never got to hear. I started absorbing everything. I'd sit in on meetings quietly, learning the language of leases, zoning laws, and return on investment. At night, after everyone left, I'd run numbers on properties just for practice, teaching myself to see patterns in market trends. The pay barely covered my rent in a small, drafty studio, but I treated that place like my fortress. I painted the peeling walls, kept fresh flowers on the window ledge, And every Friday night, I'd cook a big pot of pasta, eat half, and save the rest for the week. Mrs. Hayes became my anchor. She'd call me into her office with a sly smile and say, "Come look at this property listing. Tell me what you think." At first, I'd stammer through my thoughts, but over time, my answers grew sharper, more confident. When I finally saved enough for my first investment, a rundown duplex on the edge of town, she was the first person I told. "It's not much," I said, showing her the photos. She studied them, then looked at me with pride. "It's your start. That's everything." The following years were a blur of long hours, relentless studying, and carefully calculated risks. I lived frugally, reinvested every cent I could, and quietly built a small portfolio of rental units. The more I learned, the more strategic I became, targeting undervalued properties in developing neighborhoods. I kept my social media presence deliberately low-key. Pictures of books, coffee mugs, and sunsets. Never the meetings, never the deals, never the milestones that would hint at the truth. By the time I turned 28, I had acquired enough units that my monthly rental income exceeded what my parents had ever made in a year. Still, I told no one in my family. They thought I was getting by, maybe working an office job, nothing more. And then, a year ago, a rare opportunity came along, a cluster of properties on a quiet street, all up for sale at once. It was a bold move, risky even, but I bought them. Every single one. I didn't know it at the time, but owning that street would become the most poetic detail of my life story. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I had sent them the address without explanation, picturing the surprise, or maybe the shock, when they realized where they were headed. From my office window, I watched as their old silver sedan pulled up. My parents stepped out, looking around with the same furrowed expressions they wore the day they told me to leave. They didn't know it yet, but every brick, every shop front, every apartment building in sight belonged to me. I met them at the entrance, a quiet smile on my lips. "Come in." The lobby smelled faintly of sandalwood. Sunlight streamed through tall glass panels, reflecting off polished marble floors. A modern chandelier hung above us, the kind that looked like frozen raindrops caught mid-fall. My father's eyes darted around. "You work here?" "Something like that," I said, leading them toward the elevator. When the doors opened to my office floor, their steps slowed. The walls were lined with framed city maps and abstract paintings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the street below. In the corner, a sleek espresso machine hissed softly, filling the air with a warm aroma. My mother glanced at the leather chairs, the fresh orchids on the side table. "This is nice," she murmured, almost to herself. I gestured for them to sit, then took my place behind the mahogany desk. For a moment, I just let the silence stretch, watching them take it all in. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We're in some trouble," he began. "Financial trouble." I folded my hands. "How much trouble?" He named a figure. My mother's gaze stayed fixed on her lap. "And you thought I could help?" I asked, my tone careful. "We know things ended badly," my mother said quickly, "but you've always been resourceful. We wouldn't come if we had anywhere else to turn." I leaned back, studying them. My pulse was steady, my breathing calm. "Do you know where you are right now?" They exchanged a glance. "Your workplace?" my father guessed. I smiled faintly. "Not exactly. This building, that cafe across the street, those 3 apartment blocks next to it, they're mine." They stared at me as if I'd spoken in another language. "I own this street," I continued, letting the words sink in. "Every property you passed on your way here, I bought them, rented them out, built something from nothing, starting the night you told me to leave." My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father blinked, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't luck," I said, leaning forward. "It was years of work. Long nights. Sacrifices you never saw. While you thought I was barely getting by, I was building an empire. Quietly." The room felt impossibly still. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, a reminder that life went on regardless of what truths were unfolding inside these walls. "I didn't tell you before," I added, because I didn't want validation from the people who once believed I'd fail. Their silence was heavy, a mixture of disbelief, maybe shame. My mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe the tear that slid down her cheek. Finally, I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the street. You came here asking for help. You'll get it, but not without conditions. I turned back to them. We'll talk about those next. I walked back to my desk slowly, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, each step echoing louder than it should have. You want my help? I said, lowering myself into the chair. Then you'll have to accept my terms. My father shifted uncomfortably. Terms? Yes. Because giving you money without change would just be history repeating itself. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. What kind of terms? I opened a drawer and pulled out a notepad, the same one I used for closing property deals. First, I began. You will sell the second car you don't need and clear any unnecessary debt. No more buying things just to keep up appearances. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Second, I said, turning to my mother, you will finish the nursing course you started years ago. You told me once it was your dream before life got in the way. I'm offering to pay for the entire program on the condition you actually attend and graduate. Her eyes widened. I don't know if you can. I cut in gently but firmly. And you will. I drew a slow breath before the third condition. Finally, you both will come to family counseling. Every week. No excuses. Because the money I give won't mean anything if we keep pretending the past didn't happen. My father let out a low sigh, leaning back in his chair. You're really in a position to make demands, aren't you? I didn't flinch. I've earned that position. Silence settled over us again. My mother was staring at her hands, twisting the edge of her sleeve, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe hope, maybe fear. I'm not here to punish you, I said softly. But I'm not here to be your safety net without boundaries either. I want to help you, but it has to be in a way that actually changes things. That means no more pride getting in the way, no more pretending everything is fine when it's not. I slid the notepad across the desk toward them. If you agree to these terms, I'll clear your debts and set up a monthly stipend until you're stable. But break any of these agreements and it stops. My father's fingers drummed against the table. My mother finally looked up, her voice trembling. We'll do it. I studied them for a long moment before nodding. Then we have a deal. It wasn't just about the money. It was about rewriting the rules of how we treated each other. And for the first time, I was the one setting them. The first few weeks were awkward. My parents showed up to counseling sessions stiff and defensive, but little by little, their walls began to crack. My father admitted he'd been terrified of financial failure his whole life, which was why he pushed me so hard, and, in the process, pushed me away. My mother confessed she'd envied my independence, even when she told herself it was recklessness. I saw them start to change in small ways. My father sold the second car without a fight. My mother texted me a photo of her nursing course enrollment form with a shaky, excited caption, "Day 1 tomorrow." One Saturday afternoon, I walked down my street, passing the buildings I now knew inside and out. I spotted them sitting at the cafe across from my office, not in a heated argument like I'd seen so many couples have there, but laughing softly over 2 mugs of tea. It felt strange and healing. That evening, I returned to my penthouse and opened the small wooden box on my bookshelf. Inside was the worn leather wallet my grandmother had given me all those years ago. The edges were frayed, the stitching loose, but the words she'd whispered still burned in my mind. When they close the door, don't knock. Buy the whole street. I traced my fingers over the leather, thinking of the girl who'd stood in the rain with nothing but a duffel bag, and the woman who now sat at the top floor of a building she owned. The distance between those two versions of me was vast, and yet I carried both inside me. Helping my parents didn't erase the past, but it reshaped it. It was no longer just a story about being thrown out. It was also a story about building something greater than anyone believed I could. I slipped the wallet back into the box and looked out over the city lights. My voice, quiet but certain, filled the room. When they took away my home, they gave me the reason to own the whole street.